I'm Lauren Mitchell, and let me tell you a story. My story. Not the one people used to see in glossy photos or at charity galas. Not the one behind the polite smiles and carefully set dinner tables. No, this is the story that unfolded behind closed doors, in the shadows of a marriage I once believed was built on trust. For years, I played the part. The good wife, the steady professional, the woman who held everything together. But one crisp October morning, a simple note, one not meant for me, shattered that illusion in a heartbeat. What followed wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was clarity. And with that clarity came a resolve I never knew I possessed. This isn't a tale of victimhood. It's about reclamation of my life, my name, and my worth. So, if you think you know how these stories go, think again. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who ends up owning it. And this is how I owned mine. Chapter 1, The Note That Shattered Me. The note wasn't meant for me, but the moment I read it, my entire life cracked wide open. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early October. The sun poured through the kitchen windows of our Bellevue home, glinting off the white marble countertops that I'd so carefully chosen 3 years ago. I'd spent the morning doing what I always did, trying to hold everything together. The laundry buzzed softly in the background, another endless cycle in a life I'd built around keeping things neat, predictable, perfect. I was folding Eric's shirts when it happened. A piece of folded paper slipped out of the breast pocket of one of his tailored navy jackets, fluttering to the floor. My first instinct was purely practical. Receipt? A note from a meeting? My fingers moved automatically, smoothing it open. It was not a receipt. Thank you for the most incredible weekend. I can't wait until this is all over and we can finally be together, openly. All my love, V. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt sideways, as though the floor under my feet had vanished. The words blurred, sharpened again. I read them twice, 3 times, as if that might change them. As if the universe would correct its mistake if I looked hard enough. It didn't. I stood there in the laundry room, our bright, modern laundry room, where I'd once folded tiny onesies during those brief, hopeful weeks of my first pregnancy. A room that smelled of lavender and fabric softer and normalcy. And now, betrayal, V. One letter. One single devastating letter. I'd spent the past 9 years building a life with Eric. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. Eric Mitchell, polished, the rising star in Seattle's real estate market. Me, Lauren Mitchell, pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital, the steady hand behind the scenes. Our house in Bellevue had been our dream, every inch curated with love and care. But beneath the surface, things had changed. I thought back to the late nights, the sudden business trips, the dinners I attended alone because something had come up. I'd explained them away, clung to the idea that stress, not deception, was the culprit. After all, I was the one who had always believed in us, believed that the man who had once held my hand through 3 miscarriages couldn't possibly be capable of betrayal. No matter what happens, we'll always be honest with each other. His words echoed now with a bitter edge. I folded the note back with trembling fingers, slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan, and took a deep breath. There would be no confrontation today. No tears, no accusations. Not yet. Smart women don't react immediately. They observe, then they act. My mother's voice rang in my head, clear as if she were standing beside me. I was her daughter, through and through, raised by a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school. Carmen Mitchell had taught me strength wasn't about loud words or grand gestures. It was about endurance, precision, and knowing exactly when to strike. I gathered the folded shirts, stacked them neatly in the basket, and carried them upstairs, with the same care I always did. The facade would hold. For now. When I entered our bedroom, Eric was standing by the dresser, adjusting his cufflinks. handsome as ever, the man who could charm an entire room, who had built a career on making people believe whatever he wanted them to. His smile met mine in the mirror. "Big plans today?" he asked casually. I smiled back. "Just the usual errands. Maybe stop by the farmer's market." My voice was steady, my face unreadable. Inside, a fire had started to burn, cold, controlled, relentless. Later that night, long after Eric had fallen asleep beside me, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop. The note lay beside the keyboard. A talisman of truth. I typed her name into every search bar I could find, scoured social media, cross-referenced dates and times in Eric's calendar with suspicious transactions I'd noticed weeks before. Vanessa Sterling, interior designer, married to a prominent lawyer, a public life curated through perfect Instagram posts. But perfection was an illusion, and I was about to tear it apart. I stared at the glowing screen, the faint hum of the laptop, the only sound in our darkened bedroom. Eric shifted beside me in his sleep, oblivious. The more I scrolled, the more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Vanessa Sterling wasn't just a name. She was an entire persona, meticulously curated for public admiration. Her Instagram read like a lifestyle magazine, perfectly plated dinners, glimpses of luxury interiors, weekend getaways. But it was the captions that caught my eye. Sometimes the best meetings happen after hours. Unexpected adventures are always the sweetest. My heart clenched. The dates matched too perfectly with the nights Eric had come home late or not at all. Then I found it. An image taken at the Grandview Resort 2 hours outside Seattle. I recognized the resort immediately. We'd stayed there once during happier times. The timestamp aligned with one of Eric's supposed conference weekends. He had lied. Again and again. And I had believed him. I took a slow breath, fingers hovering over the trackpad. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. This wasn't about a single argument. It wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about strategy, about control. And if there was one thing I'd learned in 12 years of pediatric nursing, it was how to manage a crisis. First, gather all the facts. Second, never act on emotion alone. Third, strike when the timing was perfect. And only then. I bookmarked every relevant post, saved screenshots, documented dates and captions in a spreadsheet. The more evidence I compiled, the calmer I became. The initial shock had passed. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, resolve. At 3:17 a.m., I closed the laptop and stood quietly. Eric snored softly, one arm sprawled across my pillow. I watched him for a long moment, not with love or longing, but with a detached curiosity. Who was this man I had trusted so completely? No matter what happens, we'll always be honest with each other. The irony of that promise rang louder than ever. Downstairs, I poured a glass of water with steady hands. The kitchen clock ticked rhythmically, grounding me in the moment. My mother's words replayed once more. Smart women don't react immediately. I would be smarter than both of them. By sunrise, my plan had started to take shape. The first step was information. I couldn't rely solely on public posts. I needed more. Bank statements, hotel receipts, any trail Eric might have foolishly left behind. And if there was one place he guarded above all else, it was his home office. Eric kept that door locked when he wasn't working. He claimed it was for confidential business matters, and I had respected that boundary for years. No longer. I knew where he hid the spare key. In a hollowed-out book on the hallway shelf. He thought it was clever. He had no idea how well I knew him. Later that afternoon, while Eric was out for a supposed client lunch, I stood before the locked office door, key in hand. My pulse raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and cologne. His desk was immaculate, as always. But it was his computer I focused on first. The password came to me on the third try. Our wedding anniversary. Another bitter twist. Emails were clean, too clean. Eric was careful. But the browser history, that told another story. Searches for luxury resorts, jewelry, spa packages, none of which had ever involved me. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath insurance documents and business contacts, I found a slim folder labeled Business Contacts. Inside were receipts, hotel stays, restaurant bills, and one small stack of printed photographs. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them. Eric and Vanessa, smiling intimately at a wine bar. Eric with his hand on the small of her back at a gallery opening. And the final photo. Vanessa wearing an unmistakable engagement ring on her right hand, beaming at the camera. I sank onto the leather chair, clutching the photos. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't an affair of convenience. They were building something, at the expense of everything I had believed in. As I sat there, the fire inside me blazed higher. I would not be their collateral damage. I would not fade quietly while they rewrote my life. Now, it's not just about betrayal, I whispered into the stillness. It's about justice. And justice, I decided then and there, would be mine to orchestrate. Who exactly is Vanessa Sterling? And how far has her web of lies already spread into Lauren's life? Would you have the strength to stay silent while watching your world fall apart piece by piece? Don't miss Chapter 2, where Lauren's quiet investigation begins to uncover truths far darker than betrayal alone. Chapter 2. The woman behind the smile, her Instagram looked perfect, but I knew what lay beneath that perfect filter. By dawn, I had memorized the contours of Vanessa Sterling's life better than I knew my own. Sleep was a distant thought, drowned beneath a rising tide of cold calculation. Her name alone opened countless digital doors. Vanessa Sterling. Interior designer, married to David Sterling, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm. On the surface, a woman who had everything: success, beauty, connections. But beneath the curated perfection of her feed, I saw it clearly now. A woman reckless enough to flaunt an affair while believing herself untouchable. Her public Instagram was a goldmine, every post a breadcrumb, each caption a thinly veiled taunt. Another rooftop sunset? Some nights, the view is even better than the company. Perfect weekend escape with the perfect company. My heart twisted, but the sharper part of me, the part that had surfaced in the still hours of the night, took control. Every detail, every timestamp was methodically documented. I created a new folder labeled V. Sterling, Evidence. The more I compiled, the clearer it became. Vanessa wasn't just a passing distraction. She was the life Eric had been building outside of ours, and they were sloppy, careless in ways that astonished me. The Grandview Resort post alone could tear through any excuse Eric might conjure, but I wanted more, needed more. If this was going to end, it would end on my terms, not in a private argument destined to be spun and manipulated. No, it would end with truth laid bare. So stark, so irrefutable, that no one would be able to rewrite it. Smart women don't react immediately, they observe, then they act. I heard my mother's voice again as I watched the sun rise over Seattle from our bedroom window. Eric stirred behind me, oblivious. I moved through the motions of our morning. Coffee, folded laundry, light conversation. A performance honed by years of stability, now repurposed as cover. By noon, I was at a small cafe across from Seattle Children's Hospital, a place with quiet corners and strong coffee. That's where I met her, Elena Rodriguez. She was exactly as my colleague Sarah had described, a former detective with sharp eyes and an even sharper intuition. Dressed in tailored black slacks and a gray blouse, she exuded quiet competence. I slid a manila envelope across the table. I need documentation, photos, receipts, anything that can't be dismissed in court or in front of an audience. Elena flipped through the contents, a printout of Vanessa's Instagram posts, screenshots of suspicious transactions, the photographs I had found in Eric's desk. "You've done excellent groundwork," she said, voice low but impressed. Most people come to me with vague suspicions. You already have the bones of a case. I folded my hands. It's not enough yet. I want timing, proof that they've used company funds. I want to know exactly how long this has been happening and where. Elena studied me. You're not planning a quiet divorce, are you? A small smile tugged at my lips. No. I'm planning the kind of revelation they'll never recover from. She nodded slowly. Good. That helps me target what to gather. Her expression turned more serious. But be sure about this. Once I start, there's no room for plausible deniability, no going back to pretending you didn't know. I met her gaze without flinching. There's no going back anyway. She extended her hand. I'll need 2 to 3 weeks, but given how bold they've been, it might take less. We shook. As I watched her leave, a sense of control settled deeper into my bones. The old Lauren, the woman who folded shirts and believed in fairy tale loyalty, had died with that note in the laundry room. The woman sitting in this cafe was someone new. I finished my coffee and returned home. Eric wasn't there, of course. Off to meet a potential investor, no doubt. Good. I needed space. I spent the afternoon diving deeper through credit card statements, calendar overlaps, more social posts. The pattern was undeniable. Business dinners that coincided perfectly with Vanessa's so-called client events. Spa visits charged to our joint account that lined up with her Instagram captions about self-care weekend. Each discovery added a fresh layer to the structure I was building, a structure that would eventually crush them both. By evening, I had crafted a timeline, a cold clinical document where love and betrayal were reduced to data points and financial transactions. I stared at it long after dark, letting the weight of it settle over me. There was no more doubt, no more wishing for some explanation that would undo the truth. You believe you're going to win, I thought again. You believe no one will stop you. But Vanessa Sterling had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated the wrong woman. It's time to set the trap. The words echoed in my mind as I organized the growing trove of evidence on my laptop. Each click of the mouse felt surgical, precise, deliberate. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a woman with a mission. As the days unfolded, I moved through them with calculated grace. At work, I performed my duties flawlessly, smiling at anxious parents, comforting frightened children, managing the chaotic ebb and flow of the pediatric unit. But beneath that calm exterior, my mind stayed razor-focused. Elena's first updates came 3 days later. They met again. Her text read, "Grand View Resort, same room as before, photos incoming." My pulse quickened, but I didn't allow the flood of emotion to surface. Instead, I replied with a single word, "Proceed." That night, while Eric claimed he was meeting a developer from Portland, Elena's camera captured him entering the resort, hand in hand with Vanessa. The images were sharp, damning. "They're not even trying to hide anymore," Elena commented during our next meeting at the cafe. I folded my arms. Good. It'll make the collapse all the more spectacular. Elena regarded me with a faint smile. "You're handling this better than most would." I shook my head slowly. I've already cried enough for this marriage. Now I'm planning its eulogy. Back home, the tension was beginning to show in Eric, though he didn't know I could see it. He was more irritable, distracted, constantly checking his phone, stepping outside for hushed calls. The facade of the perfect husband was cracking. One evening, while preparing dinner, he glanced at me with a forced smile. "Work's been insane lately?" I looked up from the cutting board. "I can tell. You seem spread thin," he laughed. A hollow sound. "You know how it is. Big deals, high stakes." I nodded, keeping my voice light. "Just make sure you're not letting things slip through the cracks." He froze for half a second before recovering. "Well, of course not," but I'd seen the flicker of unease in his eyes. The first whisper of doubt that maybe, just maybe, I knew more than I let on. And I would use that doubt. Elena's reports became a steady rhythm. Every meeting, every touch, every expense was documented meticulously. Dinner at Romano's, weekend spa trips, jewelry purchased with our joint credit card, pieces I had never seen. "She's wearing the new necklace in her latest post," Alina texted with a screenshot. I stared at the image. Vanessa, radiant beneath a carefully composed caption. "Sometimes the smallest gifts mean the most." I nearly laughed. Small gifts? That necklace had cost over $3,000. But it wasn't the money that burned, it was the arrogance. The sheer, smug entitlement that radiated from every pixel. "Keep tracking everything," I texted back. "Every post, every charge." Meanwhile, I began preparing the social side of the trap. At a charity event for the hospital, I made casual conversation with Maria Bennett, wife of Eric's business partner, Tony. Over glasses of wine, I steered the conversation delicately. "Tony must be excited about the new project," I said lightly. Maria smiled. "Oh, he is. They're hosting a small dinner soon to discuss the next phase." My heart ticked faster. The opportunity was taking shape. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe we should do the same? Bring everyone together? It's been too long since we've entertained." Maria beamed. "Oh, absolutely. Let's plan something." I smiled in return. The first piece was in place. Later that night, I broached the subject with Eric over dinner. "We haven't hosted in a while," I said casually. "Tony and Maria mentioned it. Maybe we should invite them and a few others." Hesitated, eyes flicking toward his phone. "This weekend might be tricky. I've got some investor meetings." I tilted my head. "Saturday night? Investors on a weekend?" He forced a chuckle. "You know how it is. Flexible schedules." I leaned forward, voice soft but steady. "Tony said this is the only weekend they're available. It would be rude not to reciprocate." A pause. I could see the wheels turning. "Fine," he said finally. "We can do Saturday. Perfect." Now came the final push. Later, with a practiced casual tone, I added, "Oh, and Tony mentioned his brother-in-law David Sterling is in town. He's looking into real estate investments. Maybe we should invite him, too." Eric stiffened ever so slightly. "David? I didn't realize he was here," I smiled. "Apparently so. It'll be good for you to meet him, and for us to show some unity." Another pause, another flicker of uncertainty. "Sure," Eric said at last. "I'll handle the invitations." I nodded, hiding the surge of triumph beneath a neutral smile. I already knew exactly who else he'd be inviting, and when Vanessa Sterling walked through my front door, all her curated smiles and perfect filters wouldn't save her. Will Lauren's carefully laid plan truly catch Eric and Vanessa off guard at the dinner table? What would you feel, sitting across from the people who had quietly dismantled your life, knowing they're about to face the truth? Join us in Chapter 3, where every smile, every glance, and every word will be a move in Lauren's ultimate game of revenge. Chapter 3. The dinner they never saw coming. He thought the dinner was his idea. That was his first mistake. The invitation list had been set. The table was being prepared, and beneath every polite exchange, the trap was quietly snapping shut. For the next 2 days, I played the role of the dutiful wife with practiced ease. I suggested menus, arranged floral centerpieces, and even teased Eric about how I wanted everything to be perfect for our guests. He smiled, clearly relieved to see me so composed. If only he knew. Elena's texts continued to stream in, confirming that Vanessa had accepted Eric's invitation, that David Sterling would be attending through Tony's coordination, that every piece of my puzzle was falling into place. "Vanessa thinks she's attending a casual dinner to network with potential investors," Elena had written. "She has no idea what you have planned." Neither did Eric. I spent the morning of the dinner in quiet preparation. I reviewed my timeline of evidence once more. Photographs, receipts, screenshots, all perfectly organized and ready. The manila folder sat on my desk, a silent promise. Then I began crafting the seating chart. Every placement mattered. Eric would sit at the head of the table, as usual. Vanessa to his immediate right, close enough to catch every glance and gesture, but not so close that it would scream conspiracy. Across from Vanessa, David Sterling, a front-row seat for the unraveling of his wife's carefully woven lies. Tony and Maria Bennett would flank my end of the table, a warm, neutral presence, witnesses to what was about to unfold. As I adjusted the place cards, a strange calm settled over me. I had grieved this marriage already. In that laundry room, beneath the pale slip of paper that had changed everything. Tonight wasn't about grief. It was about truth. By late afternoon, the house was immaculate. The dining room gleamed beneath the soft glow of the chandelier. Wine glasses sparkled, the silverware perfectly aligned. I stood at the threshold for a moment, taking it all in. "They'll never see it coming," I whispered. Eric appeared in the doorway, dressed sharply in a tailored charcoal suit. He looked every bit the successful businessman he projected to the world. "You've outdone yourself," he said, surveying the room. "This looks incredible." I smiled. "I just want tonight to go smoothly. It's important, after all." He nodded, a flicker of nervousness passing through his eyes. "Right. Of course." I watched him check his phone for the 10th time, no doubt coordinating with Vanessa. Good, let him think he still had control. As the clock neared 6:30, I took a final moment alone in the kitchen, steadying my breath. The first guests would arrive soon, and once they crossed that threshold, the night's delicate dance would begin. The sound of the doorbell broke the silence. "Showtime!" I opened the door to find Tony and Maria Bennett, their faces warm with genuine friendliness. "Lauren, everything looks beautiful," Maria exclaimed, handing me a bottle of Cabernet. "It's so good to finally do this again." "Thank you, I've been looking forward to it," I replied, ushering them inside. As we exchanged pleasantries in the living room, I caught Maria glancing around. "I think David's arriving soon," she added. "Tony told me he was finishing a call." Perfect. Moments later, the doorbell chimed again. I opened it to find David Sterling, a tall, composed man with sharp eyes that missed little. He smiled politely as we shook hands. "Lauren, thank you for including me," he said. "I've heard a lot about these dinners." "The pleasure is mine," I replied smoothly. "Much more than you know, David." And then, as if on cue, Eric's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at me. "That must be Vanessa," he said, already moving toward the door. I followed silently. Through the frosted glass, I saw her silhouette, a tall figure in an elegant green dress. The door swung open, and there she stood, all radiant smiles and effortless grace. "You must be Lauren," Vanessa said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." I took her hand with a calm, steady grip. "The pleasure is all mine, Vanessa. I've heard a great deal about you as well." And with that, I led her inside. Let the dinner begin. The moment Vanessa stepped into our living room, the energy shifted. She moved with the easy confidence of a woman accustomed to admiration, head high, smile luminous, emerald dress hugging her figure with calculated precision. But beneath that flawless surface, I caught it. A flicker of nerves behind her emerald eyes as they landed on David. "David," she said, her voice a fraction too bright. "I didn't know you'd be here." David tilted his head slightly, confusion flickering across his face. "Tony invited me. You didn't mention this dinner." Vanessa's smile held for a beat too long. "It came together last minute. I didn't think you'd be interested." I watched the silent exchange with cool detachment. The first fissure had appeared, and I wasn't about to let it close. "David, please," I said warmly, gesturing toward the open seating area. "Make yourself comfortable. Vanessa, can I get you something to drink?" "Wine would be lovely," she replied, her tone a touch too composed. As I moved to the sideboard, I noted Eric hovering nearby, checking his phone again. He looked pale beneath his polished exterior, shoulders taut. God! The noose was tightening. The Bennets chatted cheerfully, oblivious to the currents swirling beneath the surface. Maria complimented the table setting. Tony asked Eric about the latest market trends. I let the conversation flow, naturally offering refills, steering with a gentle hand. When dinner was announced, I guided everyone into the dining room. The seating chart, my carefully designed stage, fell perfectly into place. Eric took his position at the head of the table, Vanessa at his right. Across from her, David sat with polite composure, his gaze lingering a moment too long on his wife. I took my seat opposite Eric, flanked by Tony and Maria. As the first course, roasted butternut squash soup, was served, I allowed the conversation to ease into familiar territory, but soon it was time to shift the tone. So, Vanessa, I began casually, spoon poised. David was telling us about your move from Denver. That must have been quite the adjustment. Vanessa's spoon paused midair. It was, she replied smoothly, but Seattle's been wonderful, and Eric's projects have certainly kept things exciting. I smiled. How fortunate you two found such synergy, professionally and personally. Across the table, David's brow furrowed ever so slightly. Eric cleared his throat. Vanessa's design work has been invaluable on several of our developments. Interesting, Tony interjected. I wasn't aware we'd brought on a new design consultant. Vanessa offered a quick, practiced smile. Mostly preliminary work. We've been exploring new concepts. David's gaze sharpened. In hospitality, you mentioned? A tiny hesitation. Among other sectors. Hotels, offices, a diverse portfolio. I leaned forward just slightly, voice light. I'd love to see your hospitality portfolio sometime. I imagine those projects must be stunning. Another pause. Vanessa's composure wavered just a fraction. Confidentiality agreements, I'm afraid, she said lightly. But her voice had edged higher, her grip on her wineglass a touch too tight. David glanced between her and Eric, a slow understanding beginning to dawn. From the corner of my eye, I saw Maria watching the exchange now, her cheerful expression giving way to curiosity. Perfect! I allowed a beat of silence to stretch across the table, heavy, deliberate, before smiling serenely. It's rare to find professional collaborations that are both so productive and so personal, I said, my gaze locking briefly with Vanessa's. Her smile faltered. Eric shifted in his seat. Across the table, David straightened, eyes narrowing as he studied his wife. The trap was set. The air in the room had grown thick, each polite word laced with unspoken truths, and we were only getting started. How long can Vanessa and Eric maintain their facade now that the first cracks have begun to show at Lauren's table? Would you have the strength to sit in silence, knowing the perfect moment to expose the truth is drawing closer with every passing word? Don't miss Chapter 4, where the dinner takes a devastating turn and the lies that held their world together begin to unravel before everyone's eyes. Chapter 4, The Dinner That Broke Them. She walked into my dining room with a smile. In 47 minutes, that smile would be gone. I knew the exact moment it would happen. The moment when the weight of her lies would collapse beneath the brittle shine of her charm. And tonight I had no intention of stopping it. As the main course was plated, herb-crusted lamb with rosemary potatoes and seasonal vegetables, I moved with a precision born from weeks of planning. Every detail of the evening had been calibrated down to the temperature of the wine and the softness of the lighting, a flawless backdrop for the scene that was about to unfold. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted into safer, more casual territory. Tony was discussing Seattle's latest commercial real estate trends. David listened politely, though I caught him glancing at Vanessa more than once. Quietly observing. Vanessa, for her part, had regained some of her earlier composure, laughing lightly, glass of wine in hand. Eric mirrored her, though there was a stiffness to his shoulders, a too eager brightness in his eyes. They knew something was off. They just didn't know how much. I placed each plate with care, allowing my gaze to sweep across the table. David directly across from Vanessa. Maria and Tony at either side, now tuned in to the subtle shifts in the room's dynamic. Eric and Vanessa, center stage, unaware their final act had begun. I sat down gracefully, folding my napkin with deliberate calm. "I hope everyone's hungry," I said with a smile. As the conversation resumed, I let it breathe for a few minutes. Then, with the practiced ease of a nurse guiding a difficult conversation, I steered it exactly where I wanted it to go. "David," I began, tone light, "you must deal with some complicated cases in your field, mergers, acquisitions, situations where trust is paramount." David nodded, cutting into his lamb. "Absolutely. In corporate law, a breach of trust can be far more damaging than a breach of contract." Interesting," I mused. "And when such breaches occur, how do you typically address them?" His gaze sharpened slightly. "It depends on the circumstances, but transparency is key. The worst damage often comes from what's hidden, not from the truth itself." Across the table, Vanessa's knife clinked against her plate. Eric shifted in his seat, reaching for his wine. Perfect. "Speaking of transparency," I continued smoothly, "I find it fascinating how, in business and in life, we often wear masks. Smiles that hide far more than they reveal." I let the words hang for a beat. Maria glanced between Vanessa and Eric, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Tony frowned slightly, sensing the shift in tone. David set down his fork, attention fully captured now. Vanessa forced a smile. "That's true in any field, I suppose. Especially in creative industries, appearances are part of the package." "Indeed," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "Though sometimes the package begins to unravel, and what's beneath can be quite surprising." Another beat of silence. Eric cleared his throat, voice overly bright. "Lauren, this dinner is wonderful. You always have a way of bringing people together." I smiled sweetly. "That's what tonight is about, bringing things together. People, conversations, truths." Across from me, David straightened, eyes narrowing as he looked at Vanessa again, and I knew he was starting to see it. The small inconsistencies, the cracks in her carefully curated facade. But this was only the beginning. As I rose to refill the wine, my gaze swept once more around the table. The stage was set, every player in position, and soon there would be no more hiding. I carried the manila folder to the table with deliberate grace, each step measured. For a moment, no one spoke. The soft clink of silverware against china faded. All eyes followed the folder as I placed it gently beside my plate, then I lifted my wineglass and smiled. "There's one more thing I'd like to share this evening," I said, voice calm but firm. "A little something about transparency and trust." Eric stiffened. Vanessa's smile faltered. David's gaze locked onto the Maria and Tony exchanged uneasy glances. Good. I opened the folder slowly, sliding out the first photograph. Eric and Vanessa, hand in hand at Grandview Resort. I laid it on the table, rotating it so everyone could see. The reaction was instant. David inhaled sharply, leaning forward. "What is this?" Vanessa's face drained of color. "That's... David, it's not..." Eric's voice broke through, strained. "Lauren, this is completely inappropriate." I met his gaze evenly. "Is it? Or is it overdue?" One by one, I laid out the remaining photos. More resort shots, an intimate dinner at Romano's, Vanessa beaming in a jewelry store. Receipts followed, hotel stays charged to our joint credit cards, spa treatments, luxury gifts. Each piece landed on the table with a precision that left no room for denial. David stared at the evidence, face tightening with each passing second. "This can't be real," he whispered. "Vanessa, tell me this isn't real." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came. Her hands trembled in her lap. Maria covered her mouth, eyes wide. Tony looked stunned, unsure where to look. I turned back to David. It's very real, and it's been going on for quite some time. I let the words sink in before continuing, voice steady. There's more. Eric has been using company funds to finance parts of this affair, placing your business, Tony, at legal and reputational risk. Tony shot Eric a look of pure disbelief. Is this true? Eric's face was pale, his voice a hollow echo. I can explain. You can explain theft and fraud? I asked coolly. David rose abruptly, pushing back his chair with a harsh scrape. Vanessa, he said, voice low and shaking, look me in the eye. Have you been stealing from your clients too? Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. That's answer enough, David said coldly. Maria reached for Tony's hand. The entire room seemed to tilt, the air thick with betrayal. I stood, folding the last document and placing it neatly in the folder. I've kept this quiet long enough, I said softly. Tonight, I wanted everyone to see the truth, without spin, without lies. Eric's composure cracked, then, Lauren, please, we need to talk about this privately. There is no we anymore, Eric, I replied. You made that choice the moment you turned our marriage into a lie. David's gaze burned across the table. You have 10 minutes to gather anything you need from our house, Vanessa. After that, the locks will be changed. Vanessa gasped. David, please, he cut her off. 10 minutes. With that, he turned to me. Lauren, if there's anything I can do, anything, you know where to reach me. I nodded. Likewise. As David strode out, the silence he left behind was deafening. I gathered the photos and receipts, tucking them back into the folder. Tony sat rigid, his mind clearly racing. Maria watched me with a mix of sorrow and quiet admiration. Eric slumped in his chair, defeated. Lauren, we need to talk. I looked at the man I had once loved, now exposed in full, and I felt nothing. You don't get to set the terms anymore, Eric, I said calmly. Not tonight. I rose, sliding the folder under my arm. It was done. But this was only the beginning. What will Eric do now that the polished life he so carefully built is starting to crumble before everyone's eyes? If you were Lauren, would you feel relief or an even colder resolve knowing the worst is yet to come? Join us in Chapter 5, where Lauren takes full control of the room, and the fallout becomes far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 5. The woman who controlled the room, they thought they could outtalk me, but I had the only voice that mattered tonight. As David's footsteps faded down the hall, the air in the dining room seemed frozen in a suspended moment of disbelief. No one moved, no one spoke. I remained standing, folder in hand, surveying the wreckage of the evening I had orchestrated. Across from me, Vanessa sat, rigid, her complexion pale beneath the shimmer of her carefully applied makeup. One trembling hand still rested on the stem of her wine glass, now untouched. Eric slumped forward, elbows on the table, face buried in his hands. The once charismatic man who had dominated boardrooms and dinner parties now looked like a child, caught in a lie too big to undo. Tony leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable but sharp with calculation. Maria sat still, her gaze flicking between Eric and Vanessa, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. And I, Lauren Mitchell, the woman they had underestimated, stood calmly at the center of it all. When I finally broke the silence, my voice was steady, clear. For those of you wondering, this wasn't done out of malice, it was done out of necessity. Eric looked up, eyes red, mouth opening as if to plead. I held up a hand. Don't, I said softly, not tonight. I turned to Tony then, letting my gaze rest on him. You deserve to know, Tony, that company funds were used to support this affair. Transactions tied to sterling interiors marked as consulting fees, but in reality financing personal indulgences. Tony's jaw tightened. I saw some discrepancies, he said quietly. I didn't want to believe. You should, I replied. The evidence is irrefutable. Eric let out a strangled breath. Tony, I can fix this. I'll reimburse everything. This isn't about money anymore, Tony snapped, his voice cut through the room like a blade. It's about integrity. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice shaking. Lauren, please. You don't understand, Eric and I met her gaze with an icy calm. I understand perfectly. You both believed no one would ever see through the illusion, that your charm and lies would carry you through, but here we are. Maria's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I can't believe this, she whispered. I thought we knew you both. I allowed a beat of silence to settle before continuing. And to be clear, I said, my tone soft but unyielding, this isn't just about the affair. It's about fraud, about betrayal on every possible level, personal, professional, legal. Eric looked as though he might collapse. His voice emerged in a hoarse whisper. Lauren, I'm sorry. I tilted my head. Are you sorry for what you did, or sorry you got caught? No answer. I turned to Vanessa again. And you? Embezzling from your clients, funneling money to sustain this fantasy. Do you even comprehend the consequences? Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came. The mask had shattered. All that remained was a woman exposed and desperate. I reached into the folder one last time, pulling out a final document. A printed email thread between Eric and Vanessa, discussing apartment listings and plans to finally be together. I placed it on the table. And if anyone doubts the depth of this betrayal, here is your proof. Tony inhaled sharply. Maria's hands flew to her mouth. I straightened, gathering the remaining documents back into the folder with precise, unhurried movements. My role here is done, I said quietly. I've given you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. I turned to Eric. As for us, there is nothing left to discuss. Then to Vanessa. And if you think this ends tonight, you're mistaken. The legal consequences are only beginning. I turned toward the doorway, my steps measured, each one resonating with the weight of everything I had unleashed. I walked away from the dining room, my steps deliberate, my heart steady. Behind me, Eric's voice trembled in the silence I'd left behind. Lauren, please. I didn't pause. I didn't need to. The room was no longer mine to manage. I had done what I came to do. The truth was no longer buried beneath polished words and designer smiles. I stepped into the foyer, setting the manila folder on the console table. My hands were no longer shaking, not even a little. The front door opened with a soft click, and David Sterling walked back inside. His face was pale but composed, fury banked beneath a veneer of cold control. Our car will be here in 5, he said, not bothering to glance toward the dining room. She'll be gone tonight. I met his gaze, offering a quiet nod. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. He exhaled slowly. I would rather know the truth, no matter how brutal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The strange, sharp clarity that follows a clean break settled between us. Then he added, voice low, You did what many wouldn't dare. You exposed them. I didn't reply. There was no triumph in this moment, only closure. As David turned to leave again, Maria appeared in the doorway, eyes still glassy. Lauren, she whispered. I faced her, ready for whatever might come, but instead of judgment or pity, she reached for my hands. I admire you, she said simply, for standing in your truth, for taking back your power. I squeezed her hands gently. Thank you. Behind us, voices began to rise, Eric pleading, Vanessa sobbing. Tony's voice clipped and sharp as he issued curt instructions. I allowed myself one glance back. Eric was on his feet now, pale and frantic, attempting to reason with Tony. Vanessa sat frozen, eyes wide with shock and terror. Her carefully crafted persona had crumbled beneath the weight of her own lies. Tony stood rigid, jaw clenched. You're out of this company, Eric, he said coldly. "First thing Monday morning, the board will hear everything, and you'll be lucky if this doesn't end in court." Eric's mouth opened, but no sound came. The room no longer offered him an escape. Maria stepped aside as David returned with the car keys. "I'll be in touch," he said to me. "There are legal matters ahead." I nodded once. "I'll be ready." And then, without ceremony, he led Vanessa from the room. She stumbled after him, no longer the elegant woman who had entered so confidently an hour ago. The front door closed with the final, echoing click. Tony turned to Eric one last time. "Get out of my house!" Eric looked toward me, desperation clouding his expression. "Lauren, please. We can talk. We can fix this." I held his gaze with calm detachment. "You've mistaken me for the woman who used to believe your words." A pause. "I'm not her anymore." Then, without waiting for a reply, I turned and left the room. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. The house was eerily quiet now, but my heart was still steady. I had not screamed, I had not raged, and yet I had dismantled them all. As I leaned against the counter, the familiar buzz of a text message broke the silence. I picked up my phone. "Elena Rodriguez, call me when you can. There's one more piece you need to see, something they never thought you'd find." Stared at the screen, pulse steady. The night wasn't over yet. What is the final piece of evidence that Elena has uncovered? One that could unravel even more than Lauren had imagined. If you were standing where Lauren now stands, would you dare open the next door, knowing some truths can cut deeper than betrayal itself? Join us in Chapter 6, where Lauren steps fully into her power and the final truths come to light in ways no one saw coming. Chapter 6. The woman who owned her name 3 months later. I stood on my balcony, finally breathing air that was only mine. Seattle stretched out beneath me, glittering in the cold clarity of early winter. The nights had grown longer since that fateful dinner, but for the first time in years, I no longer felt trapped within them. I was free. It hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks that followed, there had been lawyers, mediators, and difficult conversations, but I had faced each one with the same quiet determination that had carried me through that evening. Eric's empire crumbled faster than I expected. The board had voted to remove him. Tony had made good on his promise to expose every fraudulent transaction tied to Vanessa. Lawsuits followed, as did investigations. Vanessa's fall had been swift and brutal. Her clients abandoned her, and legal action loomed on multiple fronts. The Sterling marriage dissolved in a blur of headlines and court dates. Through it all, I moved with purpose. I'd nothing to lose. And now, standing on this balcony in my new apartment at Riverside Towers, I finally felt the weight lift. I had not just survived, I had reclaimed myself. The phone buzzed softly in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text from Elena. "Coffee this morning? I have the final update." I smiled. Final. The word resonated. It was time to close this chapter completely. An hour later, I sat across from Elena in a quiet corner of our favorite cafe. She slid a slim envelope across the table. "I debated whether to show you this," she said, "but I figured you'd want every piece of the puzzle." I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of emails, ones between Vanessa and a second party I hadn't seen before, not Eric. The content was damning. Vanessa hadn't acted alone in her financial schemes. There had been an enabler. Someone inside the financial firm Eric used. Someone who had facilitated the movement of funds quietly for a cut. I looked up. "Are the authorities pursuing this?" Elena nodded. "They will. It's in motion." A slow breath escaped my lungs. One more layer stripped away. One more truth revealed. I sipped my coffee, the warmth grounding me. "Thank you, Elena," I said softly. "For everything?" She smiled. "You did the hard part, Lauren. You stood up. You owned the room when it mattered." I thought about that as I walked home through the crisp air. The old Lauren, the one who folded laundry while pretending not to notice the cracks, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced every truth and refused to be diminished by it. The subject line of the email glowed on my phone screen. "There's one more thing you need to know about Vanessa." No name, no signature, just those words. I stared at it for a long moment, fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to delete it, to walk away from the past I had already dismantled, but another part, the one that had carried me through every dark turn of this journey, knew better. "You finish what you start. Always." I tapped the message open. Inside was a single sentence, followed by an attachment. "Check the attached financial records." Vanessa's last transactions before the dinner. Heart steady, I downloaded the file. Line after line of transactions scrolled before me, most familiar from Elena's earlier reports, but at the bottom, 3 new entries caught my eye. 3 large wire transfers. Sent just days before the dinner. Not to Eric, not to anyone connected to the company, but to a private account in Switzerland. My breath caught. I forwarded the file to Elena instantly, fingers moving faster than thought. Within minutes, her reply came. She was trying to run. The timing fits. She must have known her world was cracking and tried to shield what she could. "I'll alert the authorities." I sat back, exhaling slowly. The woman who had smiled so brightly across my table that night had been planning her escape even as she buttered her bread. I should have been angry, but all I felt was a deep, unwavering resolve. Let her run, I thought. The truth always catches up. By late afternoon, the winter sun dipped low over Seattle. I found myself standing once more on my balcony, the wind cool against my skin. Inside, the apartment was quiet, peaceful. Mine. The life I had built, piece by piece, now stood solid beneath my feet. My name was on the lease, my accounts were secure, and for the first time in years, no one controlled my narrative but me. At the hospital, I'd recently accepted a promotion, charge nurse for the pediatric unit. Dr. Chen had pulled me aside after the board meeting. "You've weathered more than most, Lauren, and you've done it with grace. The team looks up to you." It wasn't just a title. It was proof of everything I had reclaimed. Later that evening, as twilight deepened, I met David and Maria for coffee. The 3 of us sat beneath soft lights, a quiet camaraderie binding us now. David lifted his cup. "To new beginnings," he said simply. I met his gaze and smiled. "To owning every part of who we are." And as I walked home under the city's glow, my phone buzzed once more. Another email, same unknown sender. This isn't over. Vanessa wasn't working alone. Thanks for watching Day of Revenge. If you love drama, secrets, and jaw-dropping twists, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories.